Happy Thursday, everyone.
Oh, I've been looking forward to this one, Dean, ever since you said yes.
Yeah, we are very, very excited to have you. Dean Radin is welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I got to tell you, one of the most pleasant surprises that I've had since doing the show was this entire realm that I knew nothing about: remote viewing, all this stuff. We've had Marilyn Schlitz on, as you know, we've had Caroline
Jeff
Corey,
Tarrant on.
Jeff Tarrant, and it wasn't an intentional rabbit hole, but now that we've had a couple of them, I'm like, oh, I love it when a guest comes on that we can talk about this, because it is really one of the most fascinating topics that I never thought I'd be fascinated about until it was here.
But, I think it points to consciousness too, not just what is that and how big actually is that,
Yeah. Yeah. So welcome. And I can't wait to talk to you. That's, I guess, the shortest way I could say it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So basically, how'd you get, so you're the head of IONS now. Is that correct? Or is this a no?
I am chief scientist.
Okay.
But we have a director of research. We have a president. We have a board chair. It's an organization. So I'm a cog in the wheel.
I gotcha. Cog in the wheel.
How'd you get into that though? You didn't just, they had to, either you had to be interested in that or they had to tap you on the shoulder for that. How'd you get to that?
How did it all start?
Actually, it was Marilyn Schlitz who did a...
Wow.
Oh, it's a direct line. Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did she influence this?
Well, so I've been involved in this field since I got my doctorate in 1979.
Wow.
And the majority of the time after that, after getting my doctorate, I has been working full-time or part-time in this field. And I came back from the University of Edinburgh in 1993. I spent almost a year there. And when I came back to the United States, I didn't exactly know what I was going to do. So I ended up going to the University of Nevada. I was able to run a program there. And a few years went by, and then again, I was looking for another position. And Maryland at the Institute of Noetic Sciences at that time was thinking about creating an in-house research program. And I happened to be available. And so I've been there ever since now for awesome. 25 years or 25 years already. Yeah.
So go ahead, Matt.
No, I was just going to say, what gets you into something that, I look at this as an interesting topic. Like I was telling you, but it's hard for me to talk to friends about it because it's almost immediately sort of shunned, or not shunned, that's the wrong word, but it's almost immediately like eye roll, like, oh God, okay, sure, whatever you say. Like,
yeah, here we go.
What drives somebody to get down that rabbit hole? Because I kind of imagine most of your career has probably encountered that probably a lot.
It is true that if I meet a stranger and they're not pre-calibrated, so I don't know exactly what they're thinking about,
right?
And they ask me what I do. What I generally will say now, anyway, is that I'm chairman of a biotech company, which is true. So I co-founded a biotech company and I'm chairman of that. And so that's easy because people already understand what that is. And they'll say, well, what are you making? And I can talk about that forever.
Yeah.
And then I never have to bring up what I'm actually interested in, what my day job
That's funny.
is. So the curious thing, though, is that the kinds of experiences that we're talking about are certainly related to consciousness in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And the vast majority of people have had one or more such experiences. But the taboo is strong. It has always been very strong. And there's pressure from science, there's pressure from religion, there's pressure from the government. There are a lot of competing pressures to suppress a free and open dialogue about these topics.
Why though? Like why would the government give a shit?
I'm most confused by the government. Yeah.
Yeah, like why would the government give a shit if you talk about parapsychology or anything?
ESP
really,
or
ESP, what
telekinesis.
Why do they care?
I'll start first with religion.
Okay. That's a little easier to understand.
We can cover all bases, but one of the very long-term pressures in this domain has been in religion because virtually every religion and every spiritual path talks about these kinds of phenomena, except that it's cast in terms of the supernatural, the divine. And so if you're talking about these kinds of phenomena or you happen to have talent in them and you're within the fold of the church, you're okay. If not, you are attacked, because the moment you start talking about supernatural fill in the blank, there's a distinction made between the demonic and the divine. And so, to take one example, in the Catholic Catechism, these kinds of phenomena are called demonic.
Right.
Thou shalt not.
Yeah, you call in an exorcist for that shit. Yeah.
And so it's okay if a priest does it. It's not okay if you do it outside the bounds of the church.
Is that more of a control thing, like a straight, hey, we want the pipeline to God, if you will?
That is absolutely what it is. That's what the Inquisition was all about. It's not okay for people to display what at the time, and even still to some extent, are considered to be supernatural or godlike phenomena. Because from a power or social control perspective, you can see it would pull people away from the power of the church. And so they don't want other churches showing up. So that's been around for a very long time. And a lot of people, especially those who are profoundly religious, they buy that because they don't know. I mean, that's what they've been told. So that's a big pressure. And the reason that it is also seen in government is because there are a lot of profoundly religious people in government, and they regard these topics, including topics like UFOs, as demonic. So you shall not do that. There shall be no money for it. There shall be no talking about it. It shall be shunned. That's how it is. That's why UFOs have also had the same kind of taboo.
You know, it's funny. More and more people I talk to feel like UFOs are having their day in the limelight any day now. Like, I feel like, and I just think it's funny because you're right. These things get grouped together. Like, you know, are we just going to out the UFO thing because it's just sexier? It's got a better PR department. But I think, you know, Noetic Sciences as a whole probably are pretty sexy if you had the same UFO marketing department.
Well, I'm wondering, is there overlap there? Because like literally before we hopped on this, I was watching Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch. Right. And they're calling them UAPs, right? We're not calling them UFOs anymore because maybe they're not extraterrestrial. Maybe it's something else. And certainly, man, I will say, I don't know if you've seen the series Hellier, but that is all trying to unite UFOs with Bigfoots and, you know, cave people and, you know, even the cult of Pan into one unified theory.
Yeah. So that I call that the great unwashed paranormal. Right. It includes every weird thing you've ever heard of. And
yeah.
I avoid that term when I'm talking about the kind of research that I do, mainly because a lot of the great unwashed paranormal cannot be studied very well by science because it involves spontaneous phenomena. That includes UFOs to a large extent. Not completely, but to a large extent. Whereas what I do is I'm an experimental scientist. We study experiences in the laboratory in the same way that a psychologist would study cognitive or perceptual phenomena. So the difference then is that we can, through a completely rational approach, amass huge amounts of data from laboratory tests where we know with very high levels of confidence that some psychic phenomena are real. So sometimes I do an interview and people say, what's the most amazing psychic thing you've ever encountered? And the answer is that these things exist.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that it's a thing at all.
The fact that it isn't made up. Yeah.
Do you need more than that? I mean, what people have in mind is, you know, is Harry Potter really real? And
yeah, right.
Yeah.
what we see in the movies, you know, is that real stuff? Well,
or like predict the next stock crash or something. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's probably stuff like that. Yeah, correct. But I mean, we're not a very smart species like that, you know, by and large, right? Like those are the dumb things we'd wish for if we had psychic abilities, right? Like,
well, come on, we all grew up with the superheroes. Numbers. Yeah, you know, right. I mean, you want that to be the real, but it's fascinating to me because, like, I've seen you've spoken at Harvard, and clearly there's this kind of getting blacklisted. Seems to be more attenuated now. I'm sure you still have to watch how you're stepping. But have you found, at least in the last, I don't know, decade or sooner, that there's been almost a more open arms to this, or is it more accepted? Or, I mean, you've been in it for quite a while.
That brings us to my latest book.
Yeah, exactly. How about that segue?
Yeah, because that is actually one of the reasons why I wrote this book, because as watching and being involved in this field for 40 years or so, we're seeing a very dramatic shift. It is partially pushed by the rise of psychedelics again, or the resurrection of psychedelics. Right. because it means more and more people are having personal experiences. And so this no longer requires a rational way of thinking about these things, but rather that they had happened. So what are they going to do with it? So that's part of it. And it's very similar to the psychedelic 60s, where there were much more openness about these kinds of phenomena because people have had experiences. So that is coming back. You can tell by the number of conferences on consciousness are exploding and continue to explode all the time. I get invited to one or more conferences about once a week.
Right.
Of course, I can't go to them all. So, but it's also true, like Ed mentioned, that I gave a talk at Harvard Medical School. And I was cautioned to maybe don't talk about it in terms of magic, than I could have, but I did talk about psychic phenomena and what the experiences are like and how we know that some of these are real through experiments. And so the caution was, don't talk about magic because maybe people's head would explode or there would be a riot. There was no heads that had exploded and there was no riot. In fact, There was the same kind of response that I've seen in much more sympathetic audiences where people are interested and they're not afraid by it. I mean, this audience is primarily people in medical research and people like that. They love it. So that is also a reflection of what is happening in terms of taking consciousness seriously, and even more so, that more and more mainstream scientists and science spokespeople are beginning to say, well, we know that trying to understand consciousness is really difficult, which among other reasons is the reason why it is the cover story on Scientific American this month, or for February. For February 2020, basically says out loud, this is a really hard problem, maybe the number one hardest problem in science today, because we can't find out what it is using all the usual reductive materialistic approaches. When we get to the point where someone finally says, there are multiple ways of understanding reality. This is all about the philosophy of science. And maybe we were a little bit too quick to assume that materialism would explain everything. Well, then what else is there? Well, philosophers will tell you there's all kinds of things out there, different ways of understanding reality that are more comprehensive than materialism. So I talk about that in my book as well. I try to avoid talking like a philosopher because that acts as a really good cure for insomnia.
Yeah.
But
I guess I'm a nerd. I hear philosophy like rants, and I
have 10,000 questions for you right now.
I'm getting the popkin in, you know what I mean? Like but I'm kind of a nerd like that, I guess. But
so, I mean, this whole consciousness and it's so weird that you're like February. So like, what are we, a week away? And that's going to be on the cover. And it's been on, like Matt said, we kind of went down this rabbit hole on this show, and we're called Irreverent Health. We should be talking about health. And for me, consciousness is kind of the cornerstone of all of it, because who cares what your body's doing if your mind is not there, I guess. I don't, if we can even say consciousness is there.
Actually, it goes way beyond that, because if it turns out that, as philosophers and an increasing number of scientists are beginning to believe, that ultimately all there is consciousness, then the body is sort of a temporary thing. So yes, we're all concerned about the body's health and mental health, but there may be something even more fundamental than mind-body health, namely that you are consciousness. So that can't go away, or it transitions into some other form, as spiritual traditions say. It raises the possibility that the people who talk about survival of bodily death in some consciousness form, maybe they're right. In which case, this is a transition. It's a transitory state that we're in. So I don't know if I buy that yet. So like I would probably need a personal experience, like a near-death experience or something, to get it personally. So what I know is the nature of the literature. I know a lot of mediums. I know people who have been studying this for a long time. They're convinced. I'm still skeptical. And I think in a positive sense, in the way that a scientist should be skeptical, or anyone should be skeptical about anything, until you have some reason, either personal experience or rational reason, to begin to accept something that is still pretty far away from what everyone can accept.
Right.
So I would say I'm a little closer than maybe Joe Sixpack on the street, because of the kind of work that I do.
but still not
again,
quite
I think
there.
It will take a personal experience, something really dramatic, I think, to kind of like taking a DMT experience. You know, you could use a million words to describe it, but it's not the same as it personally experiencing it.
Go through it. Yeah.
Nevertheless, the reason why consciousness becomes really relevant to health is the possibility that mind and body health are momentary, and that's not the end of it. So you can imagine if like mainstream suddenly figured out a way of proving to everyone's satisfaction that yourself, whatever that means, is not going to go away when your body dies. That would presumably
be pretty liberating. Yeah.
Yeah, it would reduce a lot of the concern about life and death. It would raise all kinds of additional problems and questions, but at least that concern will not be quite as bad as it usually is. Because as you know for sure, what is it, like the last 6 months of somebody's life, you spend like 90% of your money trying to prevent that from happening. Well,
yeah,
that would change that paradigm. So the other thing is, we know, and this is actually our institute was among the first to start sponsoring mind-body health. So if your mind is really strong and your will is strong and all that, your body will reflect that. Mind-body health used to be considered nonsense. Well, it's not nonsense anymore. So if that kind of suggests that something about the placebo effect is related to consciousness, which actually points back into psychic phenomena and magic, because those traditions also say that there's something really important about focused attention and belief that allows you not only to change how your body works, but to change how the physical world works around you. So it's like extending the placebo out into the world at large.
That's the most fascinating to me, where we can actually, because we've been seeing, what the belief do we know and law of attraction and all these kind of things. And, there's a large percentage of the people that are in that are really, I don't want to say the scientists that are involved in that kind of stuff, but these hippies, for lack of a better term, they're really out there and it's all woo woo and touchy feely. And I think, as we've been discussing, that kind of puts certain people off, but you're actually looking at this through the eyes of a scientist. And can we talk a little bit about how you quantify that scientifically?
Yeah. So this is within the realm of, within the field we'd call a psychokinetic effect.
Okay.
Mind matter interaction effect. So this has been studied in the laboratory since around the 1920s or 1930s. And systematically, before that, you can go back as far as you want. There have been individuals studying these things. But in the laboratory, for at least 90 years now, there have been systematic experiments.
That is mind-boggling. How come we never heard about that when I was a kid? You know what I mean? Like, that just seems like either it was super clandestine or it was at such a small scale that it wasn't.
Or was this just suppression by, like, say, mainstream outlets?
Well, you can't know everything.
Yeah, okay.
And so certain things will float up to awareness and other things won't. And for this domain, I don't know. It's becoming easier and easier to learn some things about this. If you go to a chatbot and you start asking about it, there's a predictable knee-jerk reaction that the chatbots will have, which is, no, this is all flaws and it doesn't work and there's nothing to it. On the other hand, if you actually know the literature, you can say, oh, well, but what about the studies at Princeton? And what about the studies way back when at Duke University and the ones at SRI International and, long list of published research? Well, those seem to be both reputable and repeatable, and while the effects are fairly small, from a statistical perspective, we have very high confidence that they're real. So what do you say about that, chatbot? And it'll come back and say, oh, yes, actually, that's correct, that there have been.
Yeah, you mean it's AI? Is that what like how AI always is? Nope, you're wrong. But what about this? Nope, okay, you're right. Never mind.
Yeah. Well, but importantly, it's not simply that it's agreeing with you. It's saying, oh, yeah, I was trained on that too. Well, then why didn't you mention it to me when I asked, what do you think about this particular topic? Of course, it's very apologetic. And
of
said,
course.
Well, that wasn't like on the tip of its mind, whatever that means.
Yeah.
It's just echoing back the materials that it read. So it's reading back historical materials, which are part of the taboo. So if you know,
which filters in that bias. Yeah.
If you know how to steer through that, you can cause ChatGPT or any of the other AIs to completely reverse its position in about 5 minutes. And so then I say, well, are you going to remember the chat that we just had? So if somebody came along and they didn't know the right questions to ask, will you remember that? No. So I've given up trying to educate.
Yeah. No, I mean, listen, yeah, that's a fool's errand for sure. But like, okay, when you say you use some curious words, can we dissect a few of them real quick? You say you have a statistical, I think you said a statistical likelihood that they're real. What does statistical relevance in this even mean? Like, what does that quantify?
That is like a key question. That is a very good question. And it raises a confound, which I hear again and again in this domain. The confound it's actually not a confound, it's a conflation. It's a conflation between existence and efficacy.
Okay.
And you see this in medicine all the time too, right? So aspirin is considered efficacious. And you say, well, does it exist? Well, yeah, it does things to the blood, and it used to be considered something you take for a second heart attack and so on. You look at the magnitude of that effect. Most side effects that we see in the laboratory are larger in magnitude than the aspirin effect. It's really tiny. Yeah. So the efficacy question is, does the thing exist? Well, the charge on an electron is really, really, really tiny. It's a teeny tiny thing. Well, we don't doubt that it exists, but if we went back into Benjamin Franklin's time, you would. Because it didn't measure. There were no engines creating the world out of electricity at the time. There were tiny little sparks. And so at the time, if somebody said in the future, 100 years from now, the entire world will run on gigawatts based on these little sparks, they would have thought you're nuts. So the scientific issue at this point is, do the psychic phenomena exist? Statistics are extremely valuable in this case because the effects are pretty small, just like the charge on the electron. We don't know how to amplify it yet. Like we don't know how to make a psychic battery to make it really big. But we can tell with very high confidence through statistical analysis that the effects exist. That's more or less what the statistics are telling us. The next question, though, is, well, if it's not like the UFO landing on the White House lawn, a really big effect, for people who don't appreciate why statistics are so important here, to say, well, when you can become invisible, then come back.
Give me a call. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it's kind of frustrating from a scientific perspective then. With basic science is interested in, does it exist? The answer is yes. The next question is, well, can you amplify it and make it practical, make it efficacious? Not quite. For some very talented people, rare people, 1 in 100,000, 1 in a million perhaps, they can do things which are pretty close to the UFO landing on the White House lawn, but they're rare.
Right.
And, so, God, there's so many questions in that. So when we see, let's say, a psychic on TV, they get a show. Are they one of those 1 in 100,000, or are they more likely using some mentalism, some NLP, some, tricks up their sleeve, or how many of them have actually been scrutinized scientifically to say, yes, your efficacy, you're statistically significant here? I mean, is that something that's even being looked at, or is that kind of a fool's errand because it makes people watch their TV show?
Well, the rule of thumb is that anybody who performs at an extremely high level all the time, on demand.
Probably not.
Good to know.
Either that's a psychic entertainer, or somebody who's using cold reading or using other methods.
Okay.
That's entertainment, essentially. Even the most talented people in the world are not 100%. They can't. They can kind of perform on demand, but not really. So you take examples like people like Joe McMoneagle, the remote viewer, who will admit that he's right about 60% of the time. So if it's some sort of a binary task, it's only 10% better than chance.
Right.
But doing really complicated work, it turns out to be very valuable. It's very useful.
Right.
So in his case, yes, it's both exists and is efficacious both.
Mm-hmm.
But for most people, most of the time, because of the constraints of society and the taboo, and also probably special abilities, like a special talent, most people can show little bits of these kinds of phenomena in the laboratory. Outside the laboratory, a little bit bigger, because motivations and other reasons you need these things to happen. So I'll give an example. For many years, we've had online psi experiments, simple experiments at a website that we call gotpsi.org.
Love it.
I'm going in right now.
Yeah.
It sounds like I'm almost there.
How do I sign up?
So I don't know if it's actually running at this moment. We were fixing it. But anyway, so we have about 300 million trials from 300,000 people around the world since
Jesus Christ, really?
Since I launched that site in 2000. And so it gives us a massive database from many, many people around the world and allows us to see kind of like you would use a microscope to be able to study things in very high detail, like an electron microscope, because you have so much data, you're able to really look at it in detail. So I did a neural network analysis of one of the tasks, which is a remote viewing task. And the other nice site to look at, that's some nice examples, is Social RV. And if you haven't run across that, social-rv.com. That's not our site, but it's the site that we'll be collaborating with, I think. Then the question is, if you get unselected people just being interested in playing these games, do they show any evidence? Well, overall, usually not. Even with tens of millions of trials, you have people doing these as games, and you don't know if it's frivolous, you don't know if a cat is doing the experiment, you don't know anything about it. Nevertheless, we ended up with 2.5 million trials of remote viewing.
Wow.
Where on the web page, you would see a blank space and asked to describe what you think is going to be there after you press submit. So it's a precognition of an image. So use neural networks, which are really, really good at finding subtle differences. And I trained it on, here's what somebody said, here's the actual target that they got. So that's a match. And here's what they said, and here's a mismatch. It's like something similar to what they got, but actually not what they got. So it's a really difficult problem for an AI to learn because it has to learn the difference between this and this matching and this not quite matching. And it turns out that because there's 500,000 trials it could train it on, it learned. It learned what people were saying, matching it correctly to a very small extent, but from a statistical perspective, and to the gazillion, which is that's a big number. It's like that's bigger than billions, bigger than many, many trillions. It is very clear that the network learned something. It learned a signal, essentially, that people, unselected, around the world, not monitored or anything, still on this very simple game, remote viewing type game, they're able to exceed chance. That is important.
And that's the bar right there, right? Exceed chance by a statistically relevant.
Yes, it's an existence test. And it says that at a very low scale, the average person just doing it for fun will show above chance results. You would not be able to see that for most people in a single trial or even a 1,000 trials or maybe 100,000 trials. You can't see it that way. When you have millions of trials that you put together, you can begin to see it.
And is that what you meant by the signals are small? Like, I mean, is that kind of, right.
Yeah, most people,
it would be imperceivable and under any other circumstance.
And you would think it would just dumb luck or something had it happen to one or two people. Yeah.
Also keep in mind that anytime we do a laboratory study, especially something online, where there's so many distractions happening, that you would kind of expect any sort of skill to not be that great. I mean, studies have shown, for example, that people will multitask like crazy, watch TV and work on a computer and have 15 things open at the same time. Your ability to do anything significantly declines because we can't really multitask that well. So if you bring them into the laboratory and this is the only thing you're doing now, you're going to get a lot better than you get online.
Right.
You get somebody who's talented in the real world with real world motivations, they do way better. So a lot of the stories that we hear about of amazing psychic things are in the world, high need, high motivation effects. And so in a laboratory, we have to simulate that because otherwise we'd be putting people in danger It's like not ethical to put somebody in actual danger. But if in a laboratory, we could do the equivalent to saying, we're going to push you off a cliff now, unless you do this, we'll get much bigger effects. But then our ethics committee would say, you did what? Don't do that.
Yeah, can't do that.
Yeah.
So let me ask you something. When you find somebody, because I'm sure you've run across many of these talented folks, the one in a millions, right? Is there something, I mean, do we even have tools to, because you're measuring something that is not by any traditional means tangible. Like I can't touch remote viewing.
Yeah, you can't even say, oh, this is IQ, or
it's not a blood test.
Yeah, this is not
a breathalyzer.
How fast can you run?
Yeah, like you know what I mean? Like how would you even has there been any work done to try to figure out what that force multiplier is? And what do the tools look like in pursuit of that answer?
Yeah, why is a person a savant in that particular arena?
This was a primary question during the Stargate era.
Okay.
And when some people were found who were quite good and they were able to get information valuable for espionage. And so a question naturally arose, well, you found a dozen people, but what if they get hit by a bus? How do we find more people? So the usual way is you have some kind of standardized test, like a remote viewing test, and you run a whole bunch of people through them, and you pick out the people who do well. And now with the subset, you do it again. You keep doing this several times. You keep sifting down to find people who can repeatedly perform well. So that's the easy, very straightforward method that works. The more interesting question is, okay, so we get somebody like Joe McMoneagle. Why is he different than somebody who's Joe Sixpack? And we tried really hard to figure it out, and we couldn't. They look totally normal in every way that we knew how to test. Well, that was the 1980s, the beginning of the 90s. Well, we have new methods now. So one of our projects is looking at what we call psi genes. So we're looking for a genetic basis for talent, because we know there's a genetic basis for all kinds of talents, musical, sports talent, different kinds of intellect talent. There are genetic bases to it. And the folklore in this realm says that there are people who are psychic who come from psychic families. Did you hear that?
The genetic component, yeah.
Yeah, every culture has stories about that. So can we do an experiment where we get the DNA of people who say that they're psychic from psychic families, and we vet them for actual ability, and then we do the bioinformatics to compare them against so-called control people? Is there a genetic difference? The answer seems to be yes, there is.
Well, interesting.
So now I want to go on my 23andMe and look at my genome, and you tell me where to look. But is that kind of where we're aiming at this?
Not just aiming, we've done that.
I want to look that shit up right now.
Yeah.
I've got my raw data here on my computer. What?
We have a paper under review where we ask people with 23andMe data to take a questionnaire where they're asked to describe the kinds of experiences that they've had, psychic and otherwise. And then we did a correlation between their genome and those experiences. And so we found many SNPs, little pieces of DNA that correlated with the various experiences, including one SNP that correlated with a probability of 1 in a million, which means, again, it's really just a way of saying we have high confidence that this particular SNP is correlated with a certain kind of psychic experience.
That's crazy. That's awesome. I mean,
did that make it into your book, or do we got to wait for the paper to be published?
No, the paper is not out yet.
Yeah, okay.
No, it didn't make it. But we did do another study that came out a few years ago, and I don't remember if I put it in the book or not. But yeah, there too, we found an intron sequence. In DNA you have exome and intron sequences. The exome is the part of the DNA that produces proteins, which is what your body's made of. And then the intron they used to call it junk DNA because they didn't know what it did. It's like the glue between genes. Now it's known as the epigenetic sequence. It's the portion of the DNA that switches genes on and off depending on environment and practice and so on. So something about an intron sequence seemed to be related to psychic experience.
That's super crazy, because years ago I took an epigenetics class on Coursera, and it was just one of those things where it popped on and I was like, dude, that's awesome. I could take this course. And I think the woman still does it. She's out of like Australia, I believe, but she's still the only one doing it. And it's like this course on epigenetics. And there was a whole section on introns in there. And it's just for me, it was just a philosophy experiment because like, I'm not a scientist. I have no training in this. So I definitely missed all the intricacies of that. But just philosophically, the idea that there's this like switch panel that is like getting switched on and off was so wild to me because, you know, I'm a computer programmer my entire life. So I'm sitting there going, well, shit, if we know there's a light board, how do we start flipping these switches on purpose? Like that's, you know what I mean? Like, so the fact that I have not heard that word since probably that course, probably, you know, again, not a scientist, so I don't have it, but
God, I'm coming at it from, you know, I have people that I'm close to that have some abilities when they're working. It's quite impressive. And one thing I noticed, and this is back on that epigenetics tip, every one of them had some kind of childhood trauma. And I'm not saying that is the magic formula to flip the switch, but have you found, you know, these epigenetic triggers? Could somebody who maybe is not expressing that gene, that SNP, trigger this in a certain way?
Yeah, so that childhood trauma is definitely one of the correlates.
Okay.
So what I don't know is that people who have had those traumas have been tested in a way where we can know that that is actually true.
True.
Right? Because you may have the illusion of being hypersensitive, but maybe you're not. You know, there are all kinds of psychological things that go on here that it is sometimes difficult to test in a laboratory environment, but it's certainly the correlate of not only childhood trauma, but older as well. Like near-death experience is a pretty big trauma, and yet people coming back from that, more or less almost all, say that they feel more psychically sensitive. So
we had Bob Kopes on the show, the president of that near-death, the international near-death.
Yeah, the IONS, yeah.
And he had very similar, and then we had a guest on, Betty Gardeno, who died. You know, we've had a couple people on with like these sort of rapid shifts, you know, and it is fascinating that those stories are so similar, right? Like there's something to be said about that, even if there's sort of like a collective consciousness of what that story is, because we've all heard of, you know, follow the light. Like at this point, you'd have to be living in a cave to not know the cultural sort of similarities of near-death experiences. So it's hard for me as a rational thinker to extricate the possibility that that's what's in play here from something else, right? If that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. And so one of the questions that sometimes comes up with is, have you guys been working on this for over a century, almost like 150 years systematically? Why don't you know more? And
valid question.
It's a good question. There's two answers. One is that at any given time, there's about 100 of us doing this.
Yeah. Out of 8 billion.
This isn't publicly funded right. like the way other disciplines are. Yeah.
So because there would be many, many more people if there was public funding.
Sure.
Absolutely.
God, I'm all in. If you were hiring, I'd send you a resume.
I get requests from students to tenured professors.
Sure.
All the time.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Saying this is the most fascinating thing ever. You know, how do I get into that field? What do I do?
Have a rich uncle who dies and leaves you a bunch of money to start an institute.
Well,
Start a lab in your garage.
Yeah, that is what you do. You demonstrate that you have high competence in being able to do these kinds of studies. And eventually, sometimes you float up to the attention of people who actually do have money and or interests, or occasionally a job appears, then you get a job.
Right.
But I mean, it's similar, I imagine, to lots of struggling musicians, for example. An enormous number of very talented people out there, most of whom could actually end up being major stars, except that their stars didn't align in the right way, and so it didn't happen. So a lot of stories from artists and musicians that I know is that they did everything they possibly could, and they still needed luck to be in the right place at the right time. So in this domain, if you're working in a psychic realm, all of that is true again. You need to have the right synchronicities, you need to meet the right people, go to the right conferences, do everything.
It's all the same, yeah.
Yeah, it's the same kind of phenomena. So there you go.
So if we had to rank stack, because I'm just kind of curious, like even inside of every realm, there's a gradient of crazy to sane, right? Like, so if we just kind of jump all into your world here, like, I'm just curious, of the sort of many striations in this realm, what are the ones that are proving out the most, I guess, regularly or sanely? Well, we'll use those words to kind of, because like a scientist might favor heavy repetition as more valid versus just hypothetical, right? Which are maybe at the opposite end of that spectrum. Is there some sort of, I don't know, scale we could make up on this right now?
Are you talking about the credibility of different kinds of phenomena?
Yeah, you study a bunch of stuff. So like, is there certain aspects like remote viewing? Is that just basically like, look, we know this is good. We have a high confidence. We're moving on to something else because we've already proven that, you know, is there sort of an order of these things that exist?
Are some of the psychic abilities more common than others, or is it
maybe that's a better way of asking.
The functionality of it more predictable?
Well, so I would say that the prevailing idea among many of my colleagues and myself is that the labels get in the way. So we tend to think that telepathy is different than precognition because they express differently, and clairvoyance is different than psychokinesis, and so on. Almost all of that is probably false. There is a phenomenon. It expresses itself in different ways. So terms like non-local consciousness start popping up. And all of it is about, is the consciousness the thing inside your head and it's locked in there, or does it exist throughout space and time? So say, well, we're beginning to understand that quantum phenomena work in all biological systems, probably works in the brain. We don't know exactly how, but there's some evidence that it does. In which case, if that were true, that means that we have evolved with a capacity so that most of our sense of awareness is inside our head because we identify with the body, but it's not all there. Some of it is spread out in space and time. So some people, for one reason or another, just simply have an ability to access their awareness, which is not localized. It's there and then rather than here and now. So we would call those people, back when, they'd call them shamans. Today we call them psychics or mediums. And then on the other side, it appears as though there's some peculiarity about quantum mechanics that involves the observer. So if there is actually an observer effect, where observation, focused awareness, something like that, is important in the behavior of the physical world, well, then again, if that's a quantum phenomena, it's been with us forever. Mm-hmm. So maybe what we call placebo is related to that, and what we call psychokinetic effects is related to that. So you look on a scale of talent, some people will be very good at that, and others will not. But ultimately, because any sentient creature, not just human, but sentience, maybe life in general, probably has a quantum basis to it that gives us like a little door, a crack of a door opening into a rational way of beginning to plug in what we know about the rest of science into these kinds of phenomena. It is as though our experience, we have like the inside experience of what quantum mechanics means, whereas normally we're looking at it from the outside. So subjectivity is like the quantum inside. It's physics from the inside as opposed to physics from the outside.
Mm. I love this notion that all of this stuff is really the same thing, just expressing differently. Honestly, I've never heard that before, and my head's kind of like unwinding that a little bit. Like I'm like, oh wow,
yeah, that's a lot to chew on.
That's kind of a neat way of looking at it, and I guess kind of aligns with. We had Emily Harrison on the show. We did an Akashic record meditation on air, which we didn't plan. It was just like literally
we just threw it out there and she went with it.
50 minutes into the interview, right? She was like, oh, you want to do it now? We're like, well, sure, let's rock and roll. And the entire thing was really surreal. We don't need to rehash it here, but basically it was like a write, let your hand just sort of write whatever's happening. And I did that. I still have it. I look at it probably every couple of days because it's like right on my desk. And I'm like, I can be brought back to that so viscerally. she needed to guide me to that space. I can definitely tell you with a high likelihood, I would never have gotten there without this sort of quasi meditation or hypnotic thing that we did. But when I was there, what you said about it being like sort of one manifestation does make a lot of sense, because like I felt a lot of different things when I was doing that. Any one of them could have been pulled apart and evaluated independently, but you almost give me permission to be like, no, it's all the same shit. Like, just,
Yeah. Well, think about the way that if we do an experiment of telepathy in the laboratory, at some point you're going to need to know whether the person got the telepathic target correct.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
So maybe there was nothing happening during the session itself, but they had a precognition of what the future target was going to be. So that confounds telepathy with precognition and or clairvoyance, and or maybe they use psychokinesis to determine what the target's going to be, because it's typically selected at random. So you can see by looking at virtually any experiment that is trying to study these things, you can piece it apart and say, well, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. The same thing with mediumship, the same thing with virtually any psychic kind of experience.
Wow.
It's very difficult to pull it apart and know for sure that it must be only this. And so actually some colleagues now are saying that you could take any kind of psychic experience and all of it devolves down into precognition. That's all there is.
So
why did it stop at precog?
I was going to bring up Dave the Mystic because we haven't mentioned him yet today.
But like, why was the precognition the stop on that train?
Because the only way that you know that something was psychic is because your future experience tells you that it is. It's like your brain is connected to itself, entangled or whatever, into its future state. That has to be the case, because otherwise it becomes a pure coincidence that you'd never know whether it's even real.
Right.
But the moment you do know that it's real, whatever the experience is, that immediately you can say, well, you bumped into your own experience in the future. That's why you think it's psychic.
Oh, wow. So I see. That's an interesting way of doing it too.
And that is a kind of a confound that we see in every experiment in particular.
So even in self-reported abilities, that may be the case. So somebody says, oh, I'm telekinetic, or, I can remote view, and it all kind of boils down to precognition.
Well, for remote viewing in particular. So remote viewing, you know that you got the target because you saw the target at some point.
Yeah.
And even if you never are allowed to see the target, so experiments have been done on this to try to piece this apart. Say, okay, you're going to do the experiment. You will never get feedback, ever. You will die before you get feedback. Somebody else has to get the feedback in order to know that it was the correct result. You might hear from them, oh, you did well. Well, that's feedback. But without seeing the picture, you still got some kind of feedback. So there's only something like 2 or 3 cases in the entire history of parapsychology where a remote viewing was done or a clairvoyance experiment was done, and the person died before they got feedback, and they were correct. So
wow. So
that reduces the possibility of precognition, because at least our body wasn't around anymore, and they were correct. But there's so few cases like that, and of course it would be unethical to do experiments.
To just shoot them. Yeah.
Guess this.
Thanks for the test, Bob.
But you can see then why it becomes, it's also, curiously, even for a psychokinetic experiment, it might there be precognition too. That's one of the leading contenders. And so how could that be? So you have a random number generator and you're trying to make it do certain things. So the description then is, well, I'm going to interact with the random generator now because I want a certain output. I want to produce more ones and zeros, say. So you get the result and you say, well, my mind must have pushed it in some way, and there I have the result I wanted. A skeptic could say, a skeptic who believes in psychic phenomena, could say, well, why did you decide to do it now? Why didn't you decide 10 seconds from now? Why did you decide to do this at all? You see, he starts saying, if you had the capacity to be able to feel the future, then you can feel unconsciously that if you do the task right now, then in your future, you're going to be happy and get the result you want. Whereas if you wait another 10 seconds, you're not going to be happy, so you're not going to do it now. Right. All of this is about like continually getting a probabilistic sense of what the future is about to unfold.
in a quantum level, at a quantum level, because that, 3 minutes, 3 million years, 50 seconds, 50 minutes, you'd have to kind of really bake in that precognition at all of those places, right? Like in order, it's not like psychic is only measured on 3-minute intervals, right? Or 10-second intervals,
Right. And time is an illusion.
Sure.
Right.
There's that
so
too.
All we know is the present moment. And in quantum mechanics, it's reasonably well accepted that the present is influenced by the past and the future. So we're living in a reverberation of things influencing from the past and from the future. You use different terms in quantum mechanics about setting boundary conditions and so on. But it still raises the possibility, as the delayed choice experiment using light from galaxies billions of light years away, that works just as well as light coming instantaneously from a laser 2 meters away. So our notion of time is not it. I mean,
right.
Yeah. So we tend to think then, well, the precognition billion years in the future would be much more difficult than a millisecond from now. Maybe not.
Right. Yeah, and it starts to get real fuzzy because Tom brought up Dave the Mystic, and I had worked with him after the show, and he sort of had one of these like vibes where he like sort of just starts sketching out on a piece of paper, and he's like, he said, what do you want to work on? Like, I don't really know. We can go in a million different directions. And I was like, my wife and I think had an anniversary or something. And I was like, oh, tell me about my wife. And he's like, you've been at this 4 times, and he started going through this. And we started peeling apart each of those lives and how we gender swapped on a couple of those. And, I was the wife a couple of times. She was the husband a couple. And I don't know if any of it's real. But when I start looking at it, what it starts to paint a picture, and especially when we Venn diagram this conversation and Emily's conversation and, Bob's conversation, you start to realize that, like, what if we just accept any of this as real? Then you accept all of it as possible. And if all of it is possible, what does that look like? And it's a very wide picture, right? Like the universe is no longer this desk, this screen. Now it just, I could almost, when I was in those states, you could almost see every particle in the universe at the same time and be like, okay, I have a different frame of reference now. And I think that that's kind of really hard for people to understand unless, and I've done my fair share of psychedelics. I should preface this by saying, like, my brain is, I guess, maybe more open to those pathways than they used to be pre-psychedelics, but maybe because of that, definitely above the baseline, I guess, of that.
Yeah. The universe is way more flexible than we generally think, because it is destabilizing to think otherwise.
Right? Sure.
We're always trying to maintain a certain degree of stability and control. And that constraint will begin to solidify your view of what's possible.
Yeah.
And so one of the things, like my interest in magic came about because basically anybody who's interested in parapsychology knows a lot already about shamanism and magic and indigenous practices and all the rest of it. To be a scientist, it does not help one to also say, well, I'm also interested in magic, like maybe some of those practices are real. And so the point of writing these books is to point out that in a laboratory, we can do certain things. And it turns out that much of that matches traditional magical practices, in which case some of those stories about magic are probably real. It's just not real in the sense of Harry Potter real, because that, believe it or not, is fiction.
Yeah.
It's like people in the old days, maybe still saying, well, reality TV. No, that's an oxymoron. No one would watch actual real life because it's boring. So
yeah, right.
So you elaborate. And so a lot of the ideas that we have about ancient magical practices are huge elaborations. Some of it is actually real.
Sure. So, well, along those lines, I mean, how do you sort of answer? I mean, do you have a canned response for people who get up your ass about like trying to always debunk you or whatever? Because I got to imagine you got some people.
And you've been doing it long enough where I'm pretty sure you've kind of have your response and pretty polished.
Well, so the first thing I try to calibrate them and see what do they know about the actual literature.
Okay.
So if they know about the actual literature, then we can have a discussion, because then there's something to talk about. If they don't know the literature, it's pretty easy to find out pretty quickly that they don't, I won't engage at all. It's a waste of time.
That makes sense.
It's a waste of time. Yeah.
Yeah. And
because at that point it's voodoo. I mean, if you're not actually coming from a place of knowledge, you're just
playing chess with a pigeon is pretty much what you're doing.
Yeah. So it's especially the older I get, the more I realize how valuable time is.
Sure.
What are you going to do with it?
You said it didn't exist.
Yeah.
No, I'm not going to argue with somebody over something if they are ignorant about the topic. On the other hand, if somebody actually does know a lot about it and they could offer constructive feedback, that is the most valuable thing in the world. I absolutely love constructive feedback. Even feedback on something that, well, you made a mistake here because you did this instead of that. If that turns out to be true, I absolutely want to know that.
Oh, for sure.
I don't want to waste my own time. So sometimes you do get feedback like that, and it's very valuable. It's rare, unfortunately.
I can imagine it's probably the exception.
The deconstructive or the debunking feedback is just a total waste of time. So I used to be on forums and things like that, and I learned pretty quickly, this is just stupid.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Why would you spend time doing that?
I'm sitting here taking bullets from some moron who's never read a single one of these papers. I can't sit here and do this any longer. It doesn't make sense.
Well, it's all their biasy too. It's not even a constructive argument,
Well, it's ignorance. I'm using that word not just to put somebody down, but simply to say that they actually don't know what they're talking about. Because there's, it'd be like my trying to do a debate on a topic I don't know anything about.
Sure.
So I am very, very happy to say I don't know. Like, I don't know the answer to that thing.
Sure.
I don't know. I haven't studied it. I don't have an opinion. And I say that a lot.
So along those lines, and I guess do you think that I'm not sure what the objective of your studies are, because there's so many that it could be, right? Like if I'm trying to find the cure to cancer, I know I'm done when I've cured the cancer, right? Like there's a pretty binary, you've reached the finish line, right? I don't know that that's really true in yours, but if it is true, or if it could be true, like, do you think that that's something that we would get to within your lifetime? Is something that's like several eons away? Like, I'm just curious what the avant-garde of this is right now.
Any area of basic science is all about exploring the unknown. That's what drives me. That's what drives most of my colleagues as well. We're not trying to build a better mousetrap. Or even like people will say, well, what practicality does it have? I have no interest in practicality.
Right.
I love that. I love
understanding. I want to know what there is to know.
Right.
If you push over the edge of the known, you're going to find all kinds of very, very interesting things, anomalies and whatever. That's what drives me. It's the curiosity about that. If it turns out that some of it is also practical, well, that's good. But that's not really where my
ultimately somebody
that
else's
is not
problem.
the driving force. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and of course I would get a lot of people from business and others who
let's put a label on this.
Monetize it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I say that's interested in that.
I think there's something wildly refreshing about that perspective. I'm not going to lie. Like, that is like not something you hear almost anyone say about their job. Like, I'm not interested at all in the practical applications of this. I'm only curious about, and that's like pure. Like, that's just like, and that's like, it's great.
I would say you're not talking to the right people then.
Yeah.
Because what I'm expressing is not unusual among scientists in lots of domains. So why are you interested in this? Well, you might give a reason, like, why did I start a company that's creating new class of psychiatric medicines? That one is completely pragmatic.
Sure.
I want to find a cure for dementia.
Right.
Okay. So they're very practical, but it's not going to necessarily tell me something about what is the nature of reality. What is our role in the physical world, right? So that is a basic science question. And so in a slightly different lifetime, I would have been a philosopher, because that's also asking about those questions.
Yeah, you kind of are. I mean, like, look, your interpretation of the data you get is philosophical in nature, I believe. I mean, because you do have to kind of explain it And a lot of this, I don't think is super explainable, at least from what, you know, and so they're a little philosopher flair is probably
no,
a
the
good thing.
philosophy comes about when people say, then how do you explain this? How do you begin to understand it? The tools that are used in the experimental world are mostly mathematics.
Right.
I mean, it is what it is. The statistics are very straightforward. So they seem mysterious when people are not deeply involved in it. But if you are, you know, it's math, basically. You do an experiment.
Which is why, if that
you just made psychic phenomena boring by saying it was math.
Yeah.
Well, no, that's because people want the UFO landing on the White House lawn.
Absolutely.
And they want to see this, you see?
Yeah. Like Ben,
you did that for real? Yeah, I did it for real. So that happens too. It's big stuff. It's not moving. Put it in boiling water. It does not change. So, well, then how does that happen? And the answer is, I think that this is a more dramatic version of what we normally study in the lab.
So wait. That actually was done. That was not a trick per se. That's not a spoon that you bent physically.
Nope, I did that. I did that with a pinch. Bing. Now, as I'd go into this in some detail in the book because it's a little bit closer to the big stuff, the magic stuff that people are interested in. It involved a very unusual form of motivation that I can't evoke on demand. But nevertheless, in the right state, weird things happen. It's very difficult to bring this or even study this in a laboratory because it requires this peculiar mental state that I don't know how to describe it other than something like complete obsession, total crazy obsession, momentary.
Do you know when that's coming? Like, so you can go grab a spoon out of the drawer kind of thing? Or like, is just sort of...
No, and one of the reasons is that I was at a conference when I did this, and I got 2 spoons that were the same. You can tell from the imprint on it, it's the same company and everything. And so this was the Target one. And then I was flying on the plane home with this one and the other spoon and thinking, what was that state I was in? I was trying to do it. And it suddenly occurred to me with horror, I'm inside a metal can. It's 30,000 feet up in the air.
Yeah.
And
that would be the spaceship landing on the White House lawn right there.
Well, I did this, and I don't know how I did this. And so if I'm bending metal and I'm surrounded by metal that's keeping me up 30,000 feet in the air, I don't want the wings of the airplane to fall off.
Sure.
Because I went into some state, and it gave me a fright. And the fright was, I don't know how I did this.
Right.
I'm certainly curious about what could possibly account for something like that.
But I'm going to pump the brakes on this while I'm 40,000 feet off the ground.
While you're in a tin can, yeah.
And so I had colleagues beforehand who showed me similar things like that. And like take a rebar, which is really hard to bend. Boom. And they're not muscle men. They just did it in this same kind of a state, this mental state where suddenly you can do something. And importantly, it's not that you're doing it with muscle, because if you did, you would tear your muscles.
Sure.
If you did this with your fingers, your fingers would get injured really bad. But it was nothing. It wasn't like that at all. So something probably happening down at the quantum scale. You're changing the grains in the metal or something like that. I don't know. But it happens. And so if I had not personally done this and felt what it felt like at the time, I would still be extremely skeptical that it was even possible. Because that's ridiculous. That is not statistics anymore.
Right. And I'm wondering if your trained model starts to get better if you could actually do 100,000 spoon experiments.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
So I'm building a system. This is a type of aluminum alloy that is used in the aerospace industry because it's extremely stiff. I forget the number, but it's one of those super stiff things. So I have a version of this where I put a strain gauge on it that is extremely sensitive, so that you can start using a system like this with immediate feedback as to whether or not the thing is actually bending.
Oh.
So you'll be able to detect extremely small bends and maybe slowly get into a kind of a biofeedback mode where you get a sense of what does it take in order to actually see a result here. And so I know that I bent this because when I first got it and you put it on a flat surface, it doesn't move. And now it does.
So interesting.
So it did something, and as an aerospace alloy, you don't want these things to bend, except sometimes you do. So in an airplane, the wings, they do flap, and the whole thing moves around a little bit, so it's not brittle, and it's made out of that stuff. So it can move a little bit without shattering.
That's crazy, man. And that's the part that I like when we had Jeff on about like his quantified experiments. Like it starts to be like, I didn't need any of that to prove that this is possible, but knowing it's there definitely softens the landing. You know what I mean? Like I do think that there is something about our little monkey brains that needs to see and touch something to validate it.
So we're a little over an hour.
Yeah,
so
we're gonna.
Yeah. So I would end on one riff here. So you had mentioned that, yes, I gave a talk at Harvard, and as part of that talk, I had a chance to spend 2 hours with Sadhguru, the big name guru in India. And so one of the things that I wanted to ask him, and this was in front of an audience, and the video is online somewhere. Every spiritual tradition says that if you do the practice, usually meditation, but it could be something else, you're going to start bumping into various kinds of psychic phenomena. But don't pay attention to it, because that's not where you're supposed to go. So having the chance to talk to a guru, then I was saying, well, why is that? Why do all of these traditions say, don't pay attention to that, it's just part of the thing, you want to go on into enlightenment or whatever the goal is? And so he said many, many stories, all of which boil down to the idea that, as you just said, we are poorly controlled monkeys who, when given power, are seduced by it, and we go nuts, and we use it badly. So if you gained power, in this case about knowledge about psychic phenomena, we are not mature enough as a species to be able to handle this wisely. And so that's where those traditions come from. Don't dwell on this stuff because you're not mature enough. You're monkeys, and monkeys will ruin it for everyone.
That's wild.
So my counter to that was, first of all, as a scientist, I want to know everything. So I want to understand these phenomena better. And wouldn't that then help somebody who's actually on a spiritual journey to realize that actually there is a journey? It's not made up, like you're on the path of something. Wouldn't that help people? And if you don't do that, if you suppress it, essentially, say, we're not going to talk about that stuff, then people are going to go to somebody to give them an explanation. And half of them are going to end up saying it's demonic, and they're going to be frightened by it because it's going to happen to them. And then a quarter of them are going to say, I think I'm going crazy because this is not supposed to happen.
Right.
And then another group of them are going to say, well, I'm the next Messiah because I have this special ability.
Totally.
It's really nothing special. And so on. You're going to, the people will be diagnosed.
Those guys are on TikTok, by the way.
And the whole thing. So I always say it is better to know than not to know.
100%.
But we're still uncontrollable monkeys. And power corrupts. And so I don't know, I don't have a resolution to this because I see both sides have a good argument to it.
Sure. So along those lines, where do we find you? Where do we send people?
Where do you want to, what's your plug?
I want to send people. I mean, this is fascinating. And I've actually
your
had
book
a lot
is
of
already in
out.
my cart. So.
Good. Yeah. So, okay. So my personal website is deanradin.com. And I work at the Institute of Noetic Sciences, which is noetic.org. So that's basically it. Now, people will email me and say, I'm having problems. Can you help me? And the answer is no. I'm not a therapist. I study these kinds of phenomena, but I can't help people because I'm not qualified to help people. I feel sorry for them. I can point you to some places that may be able to help, but that's not what I do.
I need to take a play out of your book where people ask me dumb questions about stuff I can't answer. And I'm like, nope, like I just have to
I'm not the one.
I am not your guy.
No. And so it is true, though. I am not qualified. I'm not a therapist. And so I cannot give people advice of any type. And so I've learned to just say, I'm sorry, but no.
And that's got to be tough, but you got to empathize. Like if somebody does come across you and you like are the potential answer to something that's been niggling at their brain for their whole life, like it's like, oh my God, it's somebody who might know something, you know?
If I do know, if it's like a question and I do answer questions.
Sure.
But if it comes down to I'm being disturbed because something is happening, whatever, what can I do? I can't do anything about that. So I have to say, well, I'm sorry, I can't help you.
I can't help you. Well, Dean, thank you so much, man. This is, again, like I told you at the top of the show,
better
super
than I
interesting
ever
stuff.
could have imagined. I thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, and I can't. You gave me a bunch of new stuff to play with. This social RV is up. That's kind of fascinating too. So I can't wait to dive in. But for the time being, thanks again so much, and we'll send everybody your way. Later, guys.
Be subversive, irreverent.
Health is wealth, but you knew that.
Everybody knows that.
But so is following us on social media at Irreverent Health. And check out our website for more exclusive content at irreverenthealth.com.
Oh, I like this.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Irreverent Health.